data. This is the previewer, so I took every single geographic data set that the city released and put them all onto one website. And it's real raw data, but it visualizes the extent of a lot of this stuff. So the bicycle network, you can go to pdxapi.com/preview, or just pdxapi.com, and there's a link to the previewer. But it lets you see the kind of data that our regional governments produce. And I was actually really impressed the first time that I put it on a map at how high quality some of this stuff was. So if you're looking at bike lanes, this is overlaid on top of what Google Maps knows about. So when you look at something like the East Bank Esplanade, everybody knows who's ridden a bike there that there's this little ramp that goes up and this little switchback and a bridge over the structure. And you can see Metro's data and then below it Google's data, so there's accuracy. You can see who's more accurate maybe. But there's all this data for people to work with. And when you get it from Google, Google just gives it to you as a photo on here on their tiles, and you can't really, you don't know except for visually that there's a bike lane there. But when you're working with Metro's data, you can see that there's a bike lane there, and you can get more information about it. That the city calls it a multi-use trail, so you know that there might be pedestrians. That it is a last edited by somebody named Jamie. There's all sorts of fun data in there. So the types of data that I have are points, lines, and shapes. So this is a line feature, and it shows things like routes. But you can look at, say, all the libraries in the region, just to get an idea of what the libraries look like. So the one library downtown is the Central Library. And so there's a whole bunch of data. And one of the data sets that really impresses me is the sidewalks. It's actually the full extent of the sidewalk infrastructure downtown. So I was looking at this data, and I made this website, which I thought was basically the same interface, but it's a more specific use case. So this is, I thought, data sets useful for accessibility. And so instead of having to have somebody that's interested in knowing maybe you're wheelchair bound and you want to know how far you'll have to park away from an event you're trying to go to and see how sidewalk friendly a neighborhood is, you can go to ADA PDX and just get the data sets that are relevant to accessibility information. So I've integrated a bunch of transit information. There's the side. So the curb cuts data is crazy specific. You can see exactly what corners have curb cuts on them. Thanks for people at Metro as well who and the region who have compiled this data, because it's actually kind of amazing. I guess every time the government spends money on a curb cut, they have to write it down somewhere, so that's funny. And there are things like bus routes and max stops. Another specific preview I put together is findsomenature.com. This one's a little bit more fun. Find Some Nature, I did a little bit more work making it real pretty. But so we're downtown, and it by default goes to downtown anyway, but you can find where you are in the city and then look at different green space data sets. So this one is patches of vegetation. And so when you look at Google Maps tiles, you can see certain parks. They have a lot of parks on there, but you don't know exactly where you can, we're in the middle of a high-rise concrete jungle right now. What if we wanted to go outside and get our sandwich on our lunch break and be in an outside area? The parks are one option, but Metro actually hand traces, correct me if I'm wrong, they hand trace aerial photography and then release it as these shapes. So these dark green areas here have been hand traced by a government employee, and they represent patches of vegetation half a city block or larger, which I think is awesome. So you can go up here by the train tracks around the Rose Garden, you can see that there's all sorts of patches of vegetation. But when you look at just the city parks layer, there's no park there. It doesn't mean you can't go outside and get away from buildings for a while. But you can also look at city parks. You could look, this data set's a community-generated one by my buddy Michael, Urban Edibles. He also has a website, urbanedibles.org, where he collects this data, but it represents any edible fruit trees or bushes that have berries on them. So when you go into Southeast, people have gone crazy with this data. So down here, north of Last Edition, you can see that there is a rosemary bush at 1428 Southeast Taylor. There's some lavender at 14th and Salmon. There's a raspberry bush at 13th and Main. And there are notes from the person who submitted it that says, there's a rosemary bush behind Lucky Lab and a bunch of other bushes, lavender, and the status of this source is unknown. Ask before you pick.
I know you may be sentencing some of these herbs to death.
Well, sure. Well, what if they were to have gone unused anyway? Maybe it's okay. And then what I've been working on this week, I found out that there's a contest happening in New York called Big Apps. And CivicApps is essentially an open data contest. It's in New York. They have a lot of data. So I'm reusing all this stuff and rewriting it. And I have a PDX API, but I'm working on Civic API, which will be a more generic version. And here's some New York data that I loaded in, reusing the same code that I developed here. So I'm hoping to make this something that every city can do, is visualize their government data in a way that will make regular people be able to appreciate. So like baseball courts, you can look at all of the baseball diamonds in all of New York. They're really into baseball over there, I hear.
Is this Google Maps or is this open layers based?
So this is Polymaps. It's a guy named Michael Bostock who works for Statement Design in San Francisco. He wrote this. He's a Stanford grad. He wrote this summer, this map visualization framework. Beautiful. Oh, the actual base tiles are from OpenLayers. Or not OpenLayers, OpenStreetMaps. So it's all community. This interface is zero Google, which I wanted to have a departure from the Google dependence a little bit as an experiment, and I'm actually really impressed with how awesome this data is. But some of the data that New York has is really cool. But when you look at it next to Portland data, our data is just as good as theirs. So in a lot of cases, way better.
It's a lot better.
Right.
It's a lot better.
Closer to the ground.
But anyway, that's what I've been working on. I think Justin should come up. You're never going to get it to work in IE, just throwing that out there. So here's what Justin did, which is awesome. I run an event in town that was inspired by this competition, actually. It's called Civic Webs. And I stole the term Civic Web from Laurel back there, Laurel from O'Reilly. I was watching a video, I met her, and I was like, who is this person? I stalked her online, I found a video of her talking at MIT, and she was talking about community building, and I was looking at all this data and how the community could use it, and she threw the term Civic Web out there, and the Civic Web is kind of like the social web, except for instead of sitting in our homes and talking to each other, we would use technology to find places out in the real world to meet and have a beer, have a conversation, have dinner, go on a bike ride, find some trees. So the Civic Web, I turned into an event called Civic Webs, and it's hosted at different businesses. You can look on Calligator for the next meeting, but we have people talk about disaster response, preparation, building applications to engage people to go to the zoo more, all sorts of crazy things. But it's basically nerds and artists and community activists brainstorming. It's really fun. Justin came to one of the Civic Webs events, and he's like, I made this little application that visualizes crime. And I went, oh, cool, and he showed it to me, and I was floored. It's beautiful. So he takes the crime dumps that the city releases. I'm not actually sure. I think it's year-long convicted crime for a year. It's not really real-time like the animals.
7 days.
The crime dump, they're just weeks. Oh, well, I don't pay attention, I guess, apparently. But it's really, it does stay right there. Data updated on the 20th of October. So he basically took the data, it was raw data, and formatted it and put it on this beautiful map so you can see the geographic distribution of where crime happens. And so he also breaks it down by crime types. So you can go into, like, let's do nonviolent crimes because they're less, it's less of a bummer to look at. Or maybe not. Vandalism, okay. Vandalism, maybe that's all just beautiful graffiti.
Our time is up. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Max. Thanks.
Shout out to Justin. He has really beautiful graphics.
Justin.
It's not me. It's not me.
But I was amazed at how little crime there was in the city.
We're really one of the safer cities in the nation. Thank you very much. I have to take off to go to one more event tonight. I just wanted to thank again the great city team that I get to work with, Skip Newberry from the mayor's office, and all of you. This really is a fantastic movement to be involved with, and we have amazing talent. And so I just simply want to say thank you. Have fun.
Max. What? I thought I'd point out there's some...
We got to turn that one off.
It's the other one. It's the other one, yeah.
Better? A little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, I just thought I'd point out there's some Microsoft people here.
But IE is an afterthought to many of the people we
Make
associate
it easier to work with.
Yeah, make it easier to work with.
Standards.
Exactly. I was glad to see IE8, and now that the mayor's gone, I can tell you that
Not gone yet.
when I showed up to the city and it was IE6, I couldn't believe it.
We fixed it.
Yeah, Mark interceded. So anyway, thank you all for all the great contributions. Congratulations to the winners. I guess for the remainder of the time, we gotta just kind of like resume what we were doing before. So thank you again. It's been great.